Good evening, everyone. My name is Palma, and I am coming live tonight for Tidal Flooding Talk. I'm with my co-hosts Joe Martucci and Dan Skeldon. We are brought to you by the New Jersey Coastal Coalition and Triax 57.
Awesome. Hey, Palma, what's going on this?
Hello.
Hey, what's going on this sunny and kind of getting warm Tuesday?
Well, it's getting warm if you compare it to this morning, which I think was like 35 when I left for work. And then when I left work, it was close to 60. So it is getting warm.
Yes, it is. But also, we had, I was actually just looking at this big sea breeze differences today. It was 49 in Harvey, Cedars, and LBI for a high today. It was 63 though once you got to Hamilton and Upper Freehold, and then where Dan is out in Allentown today. It was spring.
Yeah, I mean, sure sign of the impending spring season. 36 hours to go, 5:01 a.m. Thursday morning, spring begins. But you see those huge temperature contrasts. So, it's the spring where kind of like the inland, is the source of jealousy, right? Because you're getting the 50s and 60s and 70s while the shore is kind of cool and brisk and, 40 something degrees. Of course, you flip the story in the summer when the inland's baking in the 90s and the shore is nice and comfy and cozy, at 75 to 80 with the sea breeze. But, kind of pick your poison. 'Tis the time of the year for the islands to be noticeably cooler.
Yeah, we've said it 1,000 times. The fall is our time at the shore, not the spring. But we'll take the sunshine all the same. The sun still is as strong in at the immediate coast as it is inland here. And Dan, just playing off of your thing, or your point about astronomical spring starting in 2 days. Our sun now is as strong as late September, so you could get a burn out there if you're out in short sleeves, especially with your virgin skin that hasn't been seeing a lot of the sun over the past couple of months here. So yeah, it's another sign towards warmer weather indeed. For today's episode, we're going to talk all about insurance, flooding insurance, what you need to know, some numbers. We had a guest that was going to come on. Unfortunately, they had to cancel last minute. So we're sorry we couldn't bring to you a live guest for this week, but we will have a live guest next Tuesday. That's going to be Bruckner Chase. He is an ocean safety expert. He runs his own business. He also does a lot with NOAA, and he lives in Summers Point in Atlantic County. So he's kind of somebody who has a national reach, but based right here in Summers Point. So we're excited to have him on next Tuesday. But let's talk a little bit about flood insurance. I actually did not know this stat, and I'm a little embarrassed I didn't. New Jersey has the fourth most flood insurance policies out of any U.S. state. That was according to the National Flood Insurance Policy, which is part of FEMA. I just did a little math here on a big Excel sheet, and there's just over 200,000 policies in place in New Jersey. Now, we should say that the flooding is not only tidal flooding, but inland flooding as well. So Warren County, Union County, my home county, by the way, all have flood insurance policies in place. But I did not think we were fourth. And here we are in New Jersey. We came in number 4. Palma, you were shaking your head. So it sounds like you knew that stat already, and I'm just behind on the times.
Well, I did a little bit, only because, we say all the time that flooding is a year-round threat here. And if you do live here on the coast, you know what flood insurance is. And I think that people learned even more about flood insurance after Sandy.
Sure.
And with the changes of the elevation standards and everything like that, it was kind of like a rude awakening for some people. And, the National Flood Insurance Program does work with, that is part of FEMA, and there are communities that can become part of the CRS, the Community Rating System, to get discounts on flood insurance policies. And the New Jersey Coastal Coalition actually does help some communities that sign up to be a part of it with getting CRS points through community outreach and other uh, activities. You work with that too, right, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, working with the coalition and then even on my own, my goal is to help towns increase their CRS scores. What the Coastal Coalition does, and what's great about the coalition is that this is cheap to free for all of the towns who are member towns here. And just being in the coalition alone, we found gets you, if it doesn't get you a one step increase just by being a part of the coalition, it gets you darn close. And then that doesn't even include the other things that the towns are doing on their own. So we're happy to offer things like our web app, which, we have about 10 towns who are working on the process right now through the local government system of incorporating that. That's going to help you with your CRS points. That the way I like to say this, it's like a white glove service for your town in terms of information for residents to know not only, hey, the flooding's coming, which, you can find that on a variety of sources, but where should you move your car as well? Like if you go to Longport's web app, you'll see a little part of Atlantic Avenue that, you could park on safely. Shows evacuation routes as well. With my business, so I own my own business, but I work with the coalition. But with my own business, that's a little more of I'll say a premium service in the sense that it involves more of your weather forecasting and public outreach videos and things like that. So there's science there, but it's more of on the strictly weather side as opposed to a more encompassing, let's say, some of the paperwork and the floodplain management that the Coastal Coalition offers. So there's many different ways to increase that CRS score. And we've talked about CRS every episode, and we'll probably continue talking about it every episode because it is important. I mean, if you're a resident of town, see if you're part of CRS, and if you're not, go to your town meeting and say, hey, can we be a part of this? It only helps. There's nothing that will hurt you being part of CRS.
Joe, I got to also just backtrack a second. You were not alone. I did not know New Jersey was fourth in flood insurance policies either.
The meteorologist didn't know. Palma knew.
Yeah,
I didn't know it was fourth, but I knew it was close.
I'm wondering, well, two questions. Number one, I thought it'd actually be more than 200,000 policies, though. I mean, it sounds like a lot, but, New Jersey has so much of its, state, because you mentioned it's not only the coast, which is densely populated with obviously thousands and thousands of residences in flood zones, but, all the river basins and the tidal places and the back bays. I'm honestly surprised it's not higher than 200,000.
Go ahead, Dan. Sorry, I was going to go ahead.
And the only other question I had was, I didn't want to put you on the spot. I'm also curious what the number one state is, which I also don't know.
That was Florida.
I figured, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I believe so. It's Florida. I believe it's then Texas and Louisiana. I can double check that. I'll fact check myself as we're going. But those I believe are the top three. And then New Jersey is 4. And it kind of makes sense. I mean, obviously that's the fact, but it kind of makes sense because New Jersey shore is so developed, right?
Correct.
I mean, even if you look at a state like South Carolina, there's a lot of empty space on the coast in South Carolina. Obviously, we think Myrtle Beach and Charleston, but there's not a lot between there. New Jersey, from Seabright all the way down to Cape May, is pretty much built up. We all know this. Just in terms of the policies, though, I'll read off some things, Dan, and I agree with you. I thought it was a little low. Then I kind of look into it, and it seems about right. So, like, for example, Avalon and Cape May County, they have 4,469 policies in force. That seems like a lot of I don't know every place in Avalon, but that seems like a lot. Ocean City has close to 15,000 policies in place. And then you go to Cumberland County on the Bay Shore, down township. That's a lot of Fortescue. If you haven't been to Fortescue, I recommend going. It's a great place to spend a few hours. 133 policies in force, and then I'll just spit out one more. I'll move up the coast here. A town like Asbury Park, 509. And you got to think when you go into Monmouth County, it's not a barrier. Most of the town is not doesn't have water on all sides. So to see even Asbury Park at 509, that kind of just makes sense to me. So
Yep.
I agree with you on the surface there because I was like, that's it, 201,000. But you kind of poke into these towns, and I think it makes sense, unless I'm adding it up wrong, but I don't think I am.
No, I'm not doubting your math at all. I just with the population of New Jersey and the number of residences that initially seemed low, but of course that was right when you cited the figure. With a little more thought and the numbers you're providing, absolutely,
Yeah.
it makes sense. It'd also be interesting, and I'm sure they do not have stats on this, how many people are in flood areas without flood insurance. Like how many people should have
Yeah.
flood policies versus how many that do. And obviously that's an impossible stat to probably calculate, or it's something that's not publicly available, but that would be interesting as well.
Yeah, and Palma, I don't know. You're a little more boots on the ground with this than me. I mean, like, what is the process to getting flood insurance?
Right. Well, of course, you would need to contact an insurance agent. Like we've had multiple on our show in the past, and find out exactly what they would offer. And you can actually check on FEMA's website. I forget the exact, I don't know if it's floods.org or something like that. I'll have
Well,
to,
there's if you go to FEMA.gov, you could definitely find it
yeah,
there.
you can actually find out what um, would be covered for your property with flood insurance.
Yeah,
And they do, I know that if you have a federally backed mortgage, you do have to have flood insurance if you are in a flood zone.
right.
And um, there are ways you could try to reduce, how much you pay for your flood insurance, and you can contact your floodplain administrator or a land surveyor to find out really like what you can do to your property to make it more flood safe. You might not, if elevating your home is not in the cards at the moment, you may be able to do other things to make it more flood safe, like installing flood vents or elevating certain mechanical equipment, things like that may be able to reduce your flood insurance premiums.
Yeah.
Just and that's something that people should reach out to their floodplain administrator about, or their insurance providers, to find out what they can do.
And we as a coalition, when we have our monthly meetings, and they're with the town, government, local governments, right? It's so it's how we give them resources, or at least they have the opportunity to discuss how to talk with you as the resident, as the homeowner, as the business owner about those kind of questions as well. I just want to pull this up, Dan. So New Jersey's fourth, Florida number one, 1.8 million policies in force in Florida. So 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 I can keep poking around the other states, but that is obviously a ton. And there's just some numbers here that are astounding. You look at, and remember, Florida has what we call unincorporated areas, which New Jersey does not. Every square inch of New Jersey is owned by a town. Not the case in Florida. Some of these counties, like Pasco County in Florida, just the county, the unincorporated area, 24,000 just in that area. And I was actually going to just look up Miami because I feel like it's a lot. And it is. Miami has 56,900 in the city of Miami, not Miami Beach, which has 46,000
Wow.
policies. So that's triple Ocean City, which makes sense. I mean, Miami Beach obviously is bigger than Ocean City. I can keep poking around these numbers all day. I'm a numbers guy, as is Dan, so I think he can relate to just looking at numbers. But yeah, yeah. Oh, Dan, you know what? You're muted there. You had a good point, I'm sure.
No, I did, and I've been fighting a cough, so I've been muting myself when I'm coughing and forgot to take it off. So thank you for the catch. But no, Florida is an interesting case too, because you've heard stories where it's getting harder and harder to get insurance in Florida with the frequency of storms, with the number of policies. They're number one for a reason because they're surrounded by water. Thankfully in New Jersey, I'm fairly confident in saying this, so I'd love to have an insurance person back me up, saying, we're not as difficult in Florida. If you want insurance in New Jersey, it is readily available. While a lot of companies have stopped doing business in Florida, just again due to the frequency of storms and the more likelihood of insurance policies having to be paid out and claims having to be paid out due to the frequency of storms down there.
And I wonder too, and this is an open question if anybody can answer it, but the state of New Jersey is looking to raise base flood elevation by 5 feet. Does that have, like, what, if any, impact does that have on flood insurance going forward? Let's say that does go through, right? And these towns are raising base flood elevation. Does that lower rates? Does that raise rates? I don't know.
I
Right.
don't.
And I mean, oh, go ahead, Dan.
No, go ahead, Palma.
Well, New Jersey already had a stricter regulations for elevation requirements compared to like national standards. And that was like, I believe it before it was just 1 foot a freeboard minimum for New Jersey. Whereas the nation was not reflective of that. And now that it's going to be 5, that is a good question. How is that going to impact people that have already elevated their property to what they thought was compliant?
Right.
Now it's stricter, more
Yeah.
restrictive.
Yeah, and it would be great again. We had someone we had our scheduled guests who couldn't make it. Unfortunately, those are questions we could ask, and we'll have more guests on who can answer those kind of questions for sure. But it's just an interesting point, to make here. Speaking of flooding, let's get just looking outside of the United States. Are you aware of the flooding that was taking place in Italy over the past couple of days?
I was not.
I was not. No.
Maybe it's just because I'm Italian and I pay attention to these kind of things. But Italy, in Tuscany and the Emilia Romagna area, had a good amount of flooding over the weekend. Now this wasn't coastal flooding, but it was flooding just from the rain that was falling in that part of Italy. There's like one viral video, it's going viral enough, let's say, where the highway is just like a river, of water that came through, and schools were closed including in Florence, which is a beautiful city. If you haven't been, great place in Italy. My best meal I've had in Italy was in Florence. And the River Arno, the Arno River, which goes through Florence and Pisa, peaked over the weekend. This is all from ABC News, I should say. Just sorting out or I should say crediting the news source there, for that. But there was the evacuation in Bologna on ground floors due to torrential rain and the flooding risks. They also had, just in the past 2 years, they had additional flooding that unfortunately killed dozens of people and hurt the agricultural business. And, I would say, fortunately, we don't really have that kind of flooding that impacts the agricultural business from the tidal flooding perspective, because our bays, where our farms are far enough away from the bays. But things that can impact is the Kirkwood Cohansey Aquifer, which is where most of the coastal part of southern New Jersey gets their drinking water from, pretty much from south of Tom's River in Ocean County down south. And I was there's the thought that with the drought that we're having, it's lowering, how should I put this? We're getting a little more saltwater intrusion from the bays getting into that aquifer. And as a result, we're seeing, and that with just the sea level rise, we've seen as well, infiltrating some of that drinking water. Now, to be clear, we have not seen that, but that is possible if our drought worsens. Now, just on a side note, we obviously had a ton of rain on Sunday, much needed rain. We didn't see much in the way of flooding, which was good. So things are looking a little better, but we're just on the cusp of getting into agriculture water use season, sprinklers going back on, and the sun, of course, getting stronger. It's already strong enough to really burn us. It's going to be pulling a lot of water out of the ground as well.
Yeah, well, we'll await the new drought monitor, which comes out on Thursday. But The rain Sunday night helped. Get a little more rain coming Thursday night. That'll help. These will put dents in the drought. But this drought is what, a 7 month and counting, ongoing thing. So one or two storms not going to do it. So yeah, those points you mentioned about the aquifers and saltwater intrusion, interesting. I think the next 2 months are crucial as far as getting with agriculture season, getting into water usage really spiking. We do need a wet spring. We need more of what just happened, spread out over time where you're not going to have runoff flooding and tidal flooding exacerbated by the runoff flooding, but we are at a crucial like month or two before the hot weather comes in, say from now through the middle of May. This is our time to dent the drought, ideally to erase the drought and get soaking rain spread out over a time where it's beneficial and you don't have to worry about flooding concerns. And that's threading a needle. It's tough to do. I'd be surprised if we do it, but ideally that would be the best case scenario.
And how far in advance can you forecast like how much rain we're going to get?
Dan, you want to take that?
Well, Joe can see it much farther than I can. I can only
I
see
don't know
about a
about
day or
that. He's
two.
just.
Joe is much more of a prognosticator than I am, but no,
I didn't go
usually
to
a
an Ivy
couple.
League school like you did, Dan. You guys got it down a little bit bad than me.
Yeah, usually a couple of days. We can pinpoint generalized amounts. And it depends how easy to forecast the system is. Sometimes it's a very clear signal. Okay, it's going to be a widespread inch. Other times, computers disagree. Some say very light, some say soaking, and of course the rain isn't always uniform too. Especially when you get to the summertime and it's convective in nature, you can have Mays Landing get 3 inches of rain and Ocean City get 3/100ths of an inch of rain. So it is more hit or miss in the summertime. This is the time of year, spring though, where the rain is more stratiform, it's more uniform. So generally, it's even throughout a large area.
And I noticed there is such a significant difference between the rain we get from tidal flooding or just from rainwater. Even the areas that are impacted. Like, for instance, when I am driving to work and I notice that this one particular road is flooded, I know which other roads will be flooded, and it's because of tidal flooding. Whereas if it's just from the rain, I'll notice what areas are flooded because of that, and I'll still be able to take my normal route to work.
Yeah, I mean the tidal flooding. The good thing with the coastal flooding, there's nothing good about coastal flooding. But at least the saving grace of the coastal flooding is that due to the efforts of NOAA, Climate Central, and a number of other groups, we can accurately map out where the flooding's going to be because there's one ocean, there's bays, we know where they are, we know what happens when it gets to a certain tide height. It's predictable in that stance. When it comes to the rainfall flooding, right? And remember, you don't need rain for coastal flooding. That is not an ingredient. But with the rainfall flooding, again, Dan's point. Well, if it rains 4 inches in Mays Landing, well, you might not know where that's going to hit because the rainfall totals are going to be so local, right? Even within a town, they could be different for an inch, maybe 2 inches if it's a big town, right? So there's a whole process with that. So the tidal flooding, we've said it before. Thankfully, we haven't seen much over the winter. We do have the king tide coming up later this month. And that is when we have a full moon and the moon is close to us. Just on a weather note, and Dan, agree or disagree with me, it looks like we got a pretty decent cool down coming around that time as well. Around the end of the month, I don't think we'll see any snow at the Jersey Shore. Maybe you will in the Lehigh Valley, a little more inland. We'll see. But when it comes to the coastal flooding, it does look like we're pretty safe. From anything at least in moderate stage for the rest of the month, I would say. There is the potential of a little flooding later this week, but it would be just minor, that nuisance kind of flooding that is a pain, but something that we can generally handle at the same time as well.
Yeah, I would say with the cool down, which I of course 100% agree on. I think I mean, we've been kind of spoiled, at least away from sea breeze influences with a pretty mild March so far. After the next 2 days, it generally looks cool for the rest of the month, and there's a pretty good chance, I think, of some onshore flow as we get towards that king tide as well. Either with a high pressure up over Canada and an onshore wind around that, or a couple of weak low pressures passing off the mid-Atlantic coast. So, we've had a pretty easy winter with tidal flooding, and I don't see a rough ending or a rough start to spring, but just the king tides themselves can cause it, and any light onshore flow could, make that just a little bit more of an inconvenience. So wouldn't surprise me if we do see some coastal flood advisories do pop up later this month around king tide time.
Yeah.
And how often do we see king tides?
So, and Dan, we could talk about this. So there's I feel like different definitions. Like there's only one king tide in my mind. That is the highest astronomical tide of the year. However, it can also be grouped into any time the moon is, closer than usual to the Earth and there's a full or a new moon. There's I feel like there's always two definitions with this.
I agree. I think it becomes a little more overused. I think it's the highest one. For instance, like the full moon, you hear the term supermoon. Sometimes we have like 5 supermoons a year. When really I always just think the supermoon is the one that is closest, to the Earth, is brighter, is bigger than normal. That's the superista moons, but we kind of lump a bunch of them together. Same thing with the king tides. 100% agree.
Is this just like a trophy culture thing? Everyone gets a trophy
Sounds
every.
like it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it sounds like it, right? I mean,
You're
There's
a
a
crazy.
full
king
moon. You get
tide.
a
You're a king
participation.
tide.
That's right. I just want to say a couple of hellos. We had a couple of people chiming in on my Facebook page. Stephanie, hello to you. Megan, hello to you. Thanks for tuning in here on this Tuesday night. Remember, new episodes every Tuesday at 7 o'clock with Dan Palma and I. And we have a couple of things we're going to do to even enhance tidal flooding talk as we go forward in time. We're getting a signal from John Hines from Triax, who's who is producing this. We have 2 minutes left. I figured, could we end on this note? Maybe this can become a segment. So this is Tidal Flooding Talk. What have you guys been talking about in the past week, weather, coastal flooding, or otherwise?
Well, I'm sure you guys will say, lots of weather because that's literally what you do.
I actually wasn't going to do weather this time, but go ahead.
Okay.
Looks like we got 90 seconds.
Okay. Well, I obviously just communicating a lot of flood-proofing information to people and substantial improvement info and some new businesses that will be dry flood proofing, which is different than residential construction. And that's all that I've got for in 30 seconds or however long.
I have not been talking weather. Amanda doesn't allow it at home, my wife, so can't talk weather, can't talk tidal flooding or anything like that. We're putting in an in-ground pool, so I'm actually trying to prevent flooding by grading and flattening all the soil. All the work is done. So I've been out just trying to prevent poor drainage flooding, I guess. That would be my flooding connection, what I've been talking about lately.
And I got 20 seconds, so I'll make it close or make it quick. McNeese State men's college basketball NCAA tournament this week. Their student manager, Amir Khan, look him up. He got an NIL deal because he is the student manager of all student managers, and I can't stop thinking about that. So happy March Madness to everybody, and we'll wrap it up for this week's episode of Tidal Flooding Talk. We'll be back with you next Tuesday with Bruckner Chase talking about being wave safe from the Tidal Flooding Talk crew.